Welcome to Satsang.
Could you please speak about the Four Noble Truths?
Okay. Gautama the Buddha created an understanding and a pathway to higher consciousness and enlightenment. He described this in the Four Noble Truths and an Eightfold Path. And the Four Noble Truths are relatively simple. The first one is that life is what he called dukkha, or dissatisfying. And he was talking about life in general. And then he went on in the second Noble Truth to state why. And the reason why is that he saw clearly that people suffered because they desired things to be different than how they were. And the more effort we put into any desire to make things different, or the more resistance we put into it, the more we suffer. He also stated that this dissatisfaction with life was created by our attachments, what we get attached to, the things that we think that belong to us or that we love. And when these things get threatened, it causes dissatisfaction in ourselves again. And so the two causes of this dissatisfaction or suffering are created by desiring things and by getting attached to things, and the resistance involved in both of those. And so the first two noble truths, life is dissatisfying. The second is this dissatisfaction is caused by desires and attachments. The third noble truth, this is pretty simple, is he stated there can be an end or a cessation to this dissatisfaction, to this suffering. And then in the fourth noble truth, he put forward an eightfold path towards enlightenment or towards higher consciousness. And it is in these Four Noble Truths that in a lot of ways Buddhism has its basis. A clear understanding that life is the way it is, and it is dissatisfying the way it is. This dissatisfaction is caused by resistance in desires, resistance in attachments, and a way out. Now, when it comes to the Eightfold Path, that is a series of ways of being in the world and in meditation that support higher consciousness and support enlightenment. This is a wonderful adventure to actually have a look at life, see that it's dissatisfying, see that there's the reason why, and see the possibilities on how to get out of it. Now, from my perspective, the way that we get out of suffering is by accepting life as it is. So whatever comes, you don't hold on to it. You let it go. Whatever happens, you accept it. And in that acceptance, there's no contracting. In that acceptance, there's a freedom. There's an end to the story. And so, from my perspective, the way to higher consciousness is to develop some spiritual practices that allow you to become present to reality instead of present to dream. That's meditation, mindfulness training, and at the same time, practicing openness, practicing a way of being in the world that is the way of the heart. Because If we practice the way of the heart and we start finding love in our lives, we don't get caught in any of the wrong things. We don't get caught in lying, cheating. We don't get caught in wrong livelihood. We don't get caught in wrong speech. We don't get caught in all the wrongs. Because when heart is present, when love is present, we just want to take care of everyone and everything. And so I see Buddhism today as a way of being in the world. And I see the best way for a human being to be in this world is the way of the heart, the way of love. And so when we are moving through the world with love, we are taking care of everything and everyone. We're not going to get caught in negativities that take us into lower consciousness. And so rather than a set of rules as to what we should or shouldn't be doing, I prefer to teach the way of the heart, because if people can find their heart, if they can find love, the way that affects everybody's mind is we just want to take care of everything and everyone. I call this the beauty way. But what it demands is a level of openness that most people don't have because they're too defended. And so the approach to higher consciousness is the practice of openness, the practice of meditation, the practice of mindfulness, the practice of self-inquiry. All of these practices enable higher consciousness, but the key is heart. The key is love. Because without love, we do need rules and regulations. We do need morality. But when love is present, when we're perceiving love, no rules are required. We will take care of everything and everyone, because that's the way love affects our minds. And so I see modern Buddhism as a way of being in the world, a way of serving heart, which really ends up serving everything and everyone. And the more we're in service to others or other things besides ourselves, the less I in the picture, the better. And if we're really on the way of the heart path, there is practically no I, because you love what you're doing. You love being in service. You love taking care. And that's one wing of a bird, that path of the heart. The other wing is the path of discipline, the path of meditating, the path of being present to what is real, mindfulness training, the path of self-inquiry. And with these two wings, we can fly. The way of the heart, practiced through acceptance and openness. The way of discipline, practiced through meditation, mindfulness, and self-inquiry. And you're going to create your reality. And so it's not going to happen because you listen to a lecture or you get an insight. It's going to happen because of what you practice. The way of the heart takes practice until it becomes your default pattern. But once it becomes your default pattern, your life is quite beautiful, because you're no longer serving you. You're serving something else. And ultimately, the mind ends up serving not just heart, but beingness. It gives its life to truth. It gives its life to the vast nothingness, emptiness that we are. The mind falls in service to truth. It is in that unconditional surrender to truth that enlightenment can occur. And what leads to that is this understanding of the Four Noble Truths and the pathways that allow you to get to higher consciousness and enlightenment. But ultimately, I'm not really big on rules. I'm more on the way of the heart. Morality is used and needed for those who don't have heart. Find heart. Find your love. Open up. Take down your defenses so you can perceive love. And then move forward from that place. Move forward from a place of taking care, of being in service, of loving humanity, of loving the planet. This is the beauty way. This is how I see Buddhism in this century, the 21st century, as a way of being in the world that is beautiful for everybody and yourself. Are there any questions, any statements, any challenges to this teaching today?
Did the Buddha teach love or morality?
It's pretty hard not to teach love if you're in love with everything. And I don't think it's possible to really be awake unless love is there. And so he would have been teaching from a place of love. But the Buddha was teaching a lot of people. He moved around every day. He was teaching a lot of people. And the Eightfold Path is basically a set of rules or understandings on what works and what doesn't work. And it's complex. You can go into each one and spend a lot of time on it if you want to. So he did set up a set of rules for people because he was moving. And if people don't have rules and they don't have heart, well, they go wild. That's why we need prisons and police officers, unfortunately, because people are out of touch with their hearts. If you're in touch with your heart, you don't do anything wrong by anybody. Why would you? Because you love people and you love the planet. You love the trees, you love the flowers, you love the animals. You would do no harm, which is a Sanskrit word, ahimsa, to do no harm. Well, trying to do no harm without love is a little difficult. You may need a set of rules. But to do ahimsa when you're in love, when you have love and you're perceiving love because you're open enough to perceive it, you don't need any rules. You will take care of everything and everyone. And I believe quite confidently that the Buddha was very much in touch with love. But some people need rules because they're not in touch with their hearts. When you set up ashrams or monasteries, you need rules to make them run and make them work. And so he created a diagram, if you like, a pathway, a map to higher consciousness for those to follow who went with him as he walked through the different villages. It was passed, the Dharma was passed.
When you can see life is suffering, can life become more difficult, especially initially?
If you don't see that life is suffering or difficult, you actually haven't looked. A lot of people live in this la-la land of it's going to get better later, hope. And hope takes them away from what is real and what is not really happening here. So it takes them away from everything that they could be perceiving but are not perceiving because they're not with what's there. If you have a look inside of yourself and you don't move, you sit still, you'll find you'll find all sorts of dissatisfactions, which you miss because you're so busy doing things in the world, or so busy hoping that things are going to get better, or using some other form of escape methodology, alcohol, drugs, whatever else. I mean, if everybody was happy with their life, why would they be doing drugs and alcohol, legal or otherwise? Why would they be becoming food addicts or doaholics? Why would they be doing all of these things if they were absolutely satisfied inside of themselves? They're not. Human beings are not satisfied. We're not programmed, even at school, to be happy. If anything, we're programmed to be efficient little machines, but not happy. The mind, by its nature, desires and constantly desires things to be a little different than how they are. Because we're so used to it, we miss the fact that that's actually suffering. It's not satisfying to be desiring something that's different than how it is. That's dissatisfaction. And if we have a look at everything we own or everything we love, and what are we like when that's threatened in any way, once again, we have to own up and say, well, that's very dissatisfying, if not creating suffering in us because of our resistance to the loss. So we have to get very honest with ourselves. The first noble truth is quite often denied by people. They say, oh no, life's okay, life's great. Yeah. That's because you haven't slowed down and had a good, honest look at what life is like for people. Human beings constantly desire things. Maybe you don't recognize it, but that is not satisfying. That is dissatisfaction. And the harder you desire something to be, or the more you put into any desire for things to be different, the more you're going to suffer. And so we're not necessarily going to agree with the way the world is, but to the level that we disagree is to the level that we suffer. The first noble truth is an absolute fact. Life is basically dissatisfying for human beings because they keep desiring things to be different, because they get attached to things and get fearful when they get threatened. This is the truth. It took me quite a while to actually get the first noble truth because I thought I had a pretty happy life. But that happy life was reliant on me escaping from how I was feeling. And I didn't see that bit straight away. It took a while of looking at myself, of watching, of witnessing my mind to see how it created dissatisfaction and how it escaped that dissatisfaction with a myriad of different escapes. So I always bring it back to this. If you can open up enough, if you can drop enough defenses to find love, to be able to perceive love, you've done the work. Because then you'll allow love to guide you. And in allowing love to guide you, you'll take care of everything and everyone.
Even with the Buddha's map, is it almost impossible for people in the marketplace to understand it and wake up without an enlightened teacher?
The beauty of being with someone who's awake, who's enlightened, is that when you sit in their presence, your mind starts expanding and you start finding that you are very, very present to silence and stillness. And so it is easier for someone who is in the presence of an awakened teacher to find a lot of the things that people spend hours and hours and hours looking for when they're not in the presence of an enlightened teacher. To sit and meditate and find that no mind and complete contentment in that no mind for a meditator can take quite a while. In the presence of someone who's awake, it can take a few seconds. And so it's a huge advantage if you are a seeker to be with an awakened person, particularly if they're a teacher, because they probably have some skill level in aiding you to undo you so you can be free. I'm not going to say at all that it's not possible for someone to raise their consciousness levels and wake up without an awakened teacher. It's just that the advantage is not measurable. It's immeasurable to be with someone who's awake. Because someone who's awake can actually see what's in the way, can see what's going to help. Someone who's not awake, no matter how skilled they are, they've missed something in themselves because they're not awake. Someone who's awake has mastered their mind, has surrendered unconditionally. They know the way. They know the traps. They've already defeated them. Otherwise, they wouldn't be awake. My advice to any seeker is to find someone who's awake and be with them.
Sum up spirituality very succinctly when you say just learn acceptance and surrender. Did you ever see the Buddha put it that simply?
Can you ask me that question again? It wasn't very clear for me.
You make spirituality very succinct, acceptance and surrender. Did you ever see the Buddha put it that simply?
I'm 2,500 years older than the Buddha. I wasn't with him back then, so I didn't listen to him personally. I've read his teachings and studied his teachings, but I don't know. It would have been fun to be with him at the time. I'm teaching in the 21st century, and I'm teaching what I feel helps people in the 21st century, as I'm sure what he was teaching 2,500 years ago was absolutely appropriate at that time for the type of people he was teaching. I feel that making it simple helps. Making it complex doesn't help much. People can get very much into the nuts and bolts of Buddhism and studying the different aspects of the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path, and they can get insight from it. But I've got to tell you that no amount of insight ever raised anyone's consciousness levels or healed a wound. No amount of knowledge, no amount of the collection of knowledge enlightened anyone or raised their consciousness levels. The only thing that works is practice. And so I keep it simple and I say practice. Take down your defense systems, practice openness, practice acceptance, practice meditation, practice mindfulness, practice self-inquiry. Insights will come, particularly if you're witnessing the mind, but of themselves, they're useless. They're just about as worthless as getting an insight from listening to a teacher. It has to be really practice. An insight is an invitation only to do the practice. And so practice openness, practice taking down your defense systems, practice meditation, practice being mindful of what you're doing, and practice self-inquiry. These practices will take you home. And I have simplified it because I think if we make anything too complex, the mind gets way too involved in it. And what we're really talking about here is going beyond the mind, not further into it.
When I looked into number 6 on the Eightfold Path, correct effort, the text that went with it mentions sustaining positive states when they arise. Is this a form of control and not a practice of acceptance?
This is a sort of question that I won't answer. Because what it does is it takes people into their minds again. It's like the whole idea is to get out of your head. And people get caught in the academics of Buddhism and think that somehow they're raising their consciousness levels by learning all of these things, and really all they're doing is becoming more knowledgeable. And more knowledgeable does not equate to higher consciousness or enlightenment. It just means more knowledgeable. So I don't really get involved in that kind of a debate.
As a seeker, what teachings of Buddhism did you take on board that were most helpful for you?
What really blew me away was the Four Noble Truths, because I had actually denied them for a long time, because I actually had felt that my life was pretty good. I had not examined it well enough to see that the first noble truth was true, and that the second noble truth was absolutely 100% accurate. It was when that I actually got that, when I saw that life is actually dissatisfying for all human beings, and that it is caused by the way we think, that I realized something can be done about this. It's not until we really own up to how we're really operating that we can make things change. And there is a way out. Look, if you can practice acceptance in life, you're going to undo your mind in so doing. When we accept things totally, the story is over. There is no pain in acceptance. There is no, it's over, it's over, it's over. The suffering has finished. It's our non-acceptance, our desire for things to be different, addictively demanding they be different, that creates our suffering. So for me, the greatest thing in Buddhism that I discovered was the Four Noble Truths. This was true, because up until that point, I didn't really have the motivation to do anything about it. It was only in the realization that we could get free that I strove for freedom.
How do we become conscious enough to really know the Four Noble Truths for ourselves?
That's really up to you. If you can't see it, there's nothing that anyone can do to help you, probably. Denial is very common. I used to deny it, so I know. Denying the Four Noble Truths. See, part of the Eightfold Path in the First Noble Truth is understanding the Four Noble Truths. And so you look at that right thought and you go, I think I understand the Four Noble Truths. Well, really, if you do, why aren't you doing something about it?
Could you please explain the middle way, the path of moderation taught by Gautama the Buddha?
I could do, but I'll bring it back to this. And it's really simple. You see, it can get very complex when you start discussing the middle way. And I'm not big on complexity. I love simplicity. I love Zen, actually. If you can find a way to take down your defense systems and be open, you'll start perceiving love. And when you start perceiving love, everything changes. Everything changes. The extremes disappear. You level out because your mind can rest in love. And you start living a life that does have a little bit of joy in it, because all the joy in the world comes from giving, and heart facilitates that. All the misery in the world comes from taking. The mind facilitates that. And so from my perspective, when we're talking middle path, I'm once again talking about the way of the heart.
As a beginner, what's the best thing for us to do when we notice we have become defended?
Drop your defenses. And if you can't, work out why. Have a look at your mind, examine your mind. This is one of the beauties of taking up meditation. You develop a silent witness that watches the mind. And in that witnessing, we get to see what's in the way and not what's working. Because we can see what's working and what's not working, we then have the ability to change some things about the way we operate in our minds. But until we actually do that, nothing's going to change. And so the first thing that I advise people to do really is to start meditating, because then you can start to see how your mind is working. You get to witness the defense systems, the belief systems, the different agendas you run. You get to see the nuts and the bolts of the mind. And because you're seeing the nuts and the bolts of them, you can do something about the way it's going. But that's going to be completely up to you. Meditation takes your time. But I advise anybody to get into meditation. I also advise people to be present to reality, mindfulness. Be present to what you're doing around the place. Be present to your body. Have your awareness in your body rather than in your head. The greatest trap for all human beings is living in the matrix of their mind, which is absolutely not real. Meditation affords you recovery from the dream that you've been lost in.
Why do we tend to feel wounding in our hearts? Is that where we tend to store energy?
What you're asking, I guess, is why do we feel pain in our hearts? It seems that's where it appears. when we feel hurt, quite often we'll feel it in the chest here. You're asking me why? I have no idea. It's just what is. See, here's the thing. It's like people get involved in high consciousness or spirituality, whether it's Buddhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Sufism, whatever, and they think that somehow they're going to get there by studying, by collecting answers, by collecting knowledge. And this is a huge mistake. That's actually how you get a degree at university. You collect knowledge and then you pass a few exams, put a few papers in. Not how you get higher consciousness. You get higher consciousness through practice. The practice of meditation, the practice of mindfulness, the practice of self-inquiry, and the practice of openness. It is only through practice that we raise our consciousness levels, not through thinking, not through collecting knowledge, only through practice.
Sometimes in service, I feel like it's a chore or I want to do something else. What should I do when I notice this?
Okay, so I don't give any of those type of thoughts, or I didn't when I used to have them, any credence whatsoever. I love being in service. I chose a life of being in service after I realized that that would support heart. After I realized that was the way to live in this world that was beautiful. Up until that point, I had lived pretty much for myself, and I got to see what a desert of a life I had lived, even though I'd been very successful in the material world. If we don't have heart, if we don't have love, if we don't perceive it, no matter how wealthy or how successful we are broke. And moving into service, you do it because you want to, because you've seen the light. You've seen that living selfishly is a horrible way to live for any human being. It just creates more misery after more misery. Self-obsession is misery. Selfishness is what's destroying this planet for us to live on. If there was more heart on this planet, we would take care of the planet a lot more than we are currently. It's the lack of heart which is, in a way, supporting selfishness, supporting the destruction of our own planet as far as our living conditions are concerned. If you really want to make a difference on this planet, open up, find heart. That's the best you can do. Raise your consciousness levels, because it is only in the raising of consciousness levels and the opening of heart that this planet is going to be saved. Not in anything else.
We can't care for absolutely everything. How can we discern what we should care for in our lives?
How about everything? How about caring for everything? Because when love is present, that's how we feel. And if love is not present, well, that's our doing, because love is always here. If you're not perceiving it, it's because you're closed. It's always here. And when you're in touch with love, you just want to take care. You take care of everything. That's how it affects the mind. And so if you're not experiencing love, well, there's something in the way. It's probably you and your defense systems. Undo them, open up, practice openness, practice acceptance. This is the way.
Is caring the same as responsibility?
Responsibility. The ultimate responsibility is I make myself feel. And most people don't get into that level of responsibility. They blame other things and other people for how they feel. They turn themselves into victims of life, situations, people, even themselves. The ultimate responsibility is I make myself feel. You cannot make me feel, and I own it. I own the responsibility that I make myself feel. And because of that, I cannot blame you, a circumstance, or anything else for how I feel. I'm 100% responsible for it. And that is probably the highest level of maturity there is, taking full and absolute responsibility that you make yourself feel. And from that, you take responsibility for everything else. If you've hit that level of responsibility as a man or a woman, you also realize that you are responsible for everything else. It is only in immaturity that we think we are not responsible.
I know that logically I make myself feel. However, when I get triggered, I forget and I start to blame. What can help me?
Get out of dream. See, if you're blaming, you're dreaming. You see, your thoughts are dreams, they're not real. Let go of the blame, or hold on to the blame and stay in the dream, your choice. Without blame, there's no victim. There's no story even. It's over. It's up to you. Life is just the way it is.
In those times, I can actually say to myself, I am blaming. However, I still feel a lack of acceptance. Can you help me there?
If you don't accept life as it is, you're going to suffer. And so it's not me that can help you. Only you can help you. Nobody can help you but you. And if you're unwilling to help yourself because you're unwilling to take responsibility for yourself, you are beyond help. You create your reality with the way you think. Nobody does it for you. You are 100% responsible for how you think. You want some help in changing, only you can do that. If you're not willing to take responsibility, if you're going to keep contracting to the way the world is, keep resisting the way the world is, that's your doing, nobody else's. You might like to think that it's something else outside of you, but it's not. You are 100% responsible for the way you operate.
When we are in blame, is letting go with the breath something that can help us?
Sure. Yeah, letting go with the breath, on the outward breath, just breathing out and letting it all go helps. But that's kind of like a coping mechanism. It's not going to solve the problem, really. And temporarily, it'll give you relief. But if you want to not be caught, undo the belief systems inside yourself that have expectations attached to them that when unmet, you contract over. Undo your mind so you don't get contracted, so you don't get caught. Develop a silent witness that has a look at the mind, that sees the mind. You see the belief systems that are involved in your contractions and undo them. We talk about right thought. Anything that contracts you, anything that takes you into resistance has a belief system attached to it. That type of thought is in the way. It's an obstacle because it's contracting you. You want a mind that is equanimous, a mind that stays level. Undo your mind. Find a way to accept life as it is. Just using coping mechanisms of breathing out, well, they'll give you a little bit of relief in the moment, but ultimately they're not going to change much. The mind needs to be seen through and undone so it stays equanimous. And so even when someone attacks you, it stays level.
Would it be correct to say the solution to suffering is just consciously choosing how to condition the already conditioned mind?
The solution to suffering is easy. Wake up. Find yourself as truth and be free of the mind. You see, someone who's awake is living as presence. They're not living as the mind anymore. The mind has dropped. It has surrendered unconditionally. This is the ultimate freedom. There is no suffering in this. The mind rests in beingness, in profound contentment. Wake up.
Can you explain what nirvana is?
There's a few different definitions of nirvana. The one I like the best is annihilation. People like to think sometimes that nirvana is equivalent to the Christian heaven. I don't see it that way at all. It's annihilation of the problem. And the only problem there ever is I. Because it is the I that constantly wants to contract against the world, wants to go in resistance to the world, wants to attract attention to itself. Nirvana is an end result. Annihilation of the I. In unconditional surrender, the I is absolutely annihilated. And then awareness or beingness can discover itself and stay aware of itself or on itself. This is very beautiful, but it's not actually a party that the I can come to, because the I is a dream. It's not real. It doesn't never wake up. That's aware of the mind. That's aware. It discovers itself. It becomes aware of itself. Beingness becomes aware of itself. Isness becomes aware of itself. God becomes aware of itself, if you want to use the word God. Sometimes it's called nirvana.
Do you ever feel sadness when you see so much unconsciousness around you?
Yes. That's why I do what I do. There is a lot of tragedy to be a human being in the world. Everything that we have is going to be taken from us sooner or later. We are born to die and ultimately lose everything that we have. It is tragic in some ways to be a human being. It is amazingly beautiful in other ways. But in teaching the Dharma, which is actually a way to higher consciousness, a way to freedom, there's a possibility for those who are willing to take it on board to get free, to get out of the tragedy, to get out of the suffering, to find themselves as truth. And so the Dharma is very important because it enables freedom. The Buddha created a level of Dharma 2,500 years ago, including the Four Noble Truths and the Eightfold Path to freedom, to ultimate freedom, enlightenment. And I support that 100% because I don't think there is any other possibility for freedom.
Why are there so very few humans who care about alleviating themselves from suffering?
Oh, I don't know if that's true. I think most people don't want to suffer. Whether they're willing to do something about that or not, that's another story. When you say so few, I think there's a lot of people who would like to get free of suffering. I just feel there's probably quite a lot that don't know how. And that is why I teach the Dharma, to give a roadmap on how to get free for those who are interested.
I often find myself gossiping about my friends. Is there anything wrong with this in regards to right speech?
Practice openness, practice acceptance, practice meditation, practice mindfulness, and practice self-inquiry. Nothing else matters.
Could you speak a little more on the types of self-inquiry practices?
I have spoken at length on those practices before, so I don't feel to today.
There is a phrase that says, if you meet the Buddha on the road, kill him. What does this mean?
Well, let's get things right from the beginning. It doesn't mean you kill the Buddha. First of all, the Buddha is not a person. The Buddha is a presence. So what happens for some people is they have satori's. In other words, they have glimpses of reality, glimpses of their true nature, glimpses of the Buddha. Now, those glimpses are basically an invitation to do the work, to find that as self always. What happens, though, is people remember the satori, and then they compare everything against it that is happening for them. And in the comparing, they miss the subtle satoris. They miss things because they're living in a dream of memory. They're living in a dream of comparison. And so it is said, if you meet the Buddha, in other words, if you have a satori, that you should actually forget it. Don't keep dwelling on it. Don't keep using it to compare with your experience today. Kill the Buddha. And so the statement, if you meet the Buddha on the path, kill the Buddha, has nothing to do with living Buddhas. Let them live. It has to do with you holding on to memories of past insights into reality that are now in your way because you're just living in mind comparing. Let it all go. Let it all go.
Is care about action or intention?
Both. It's a pretty simple answer.
In Buddhism, the triple gem, the Buddha, the Dharma, and Sangha, is seen as a refuge. What does it mean to take refuge in the Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha?
Okay. So that's a completely new subject, which has not a great deal to do with the Four Noble Truths or the Eightfold Path. So we've changed horses, have we? Right at the end of our session. It means you must be running out of questions to ask me. Aha.
That is correct.
Life as we know it, if we're willing to find heart, is beautiful. It is the most beautiful thing in the world to find our own hearts, to find love. And all we got to do is take down our defense systems and open up. And this in itself is a way to higher consciousness. It's a way to super consciousness. Yet it goes thoroughly against the survival mechanism of the mind, because we survive through resistance and through closure. And so those who have higher consciousness have learnt to surrender that resistance, have learnt to surrender that closure. They've taken their defense systems down and they walk through the world vulnerably, like a newborn, wide open. And in that wide openness, there is love. And it's beautiful. It's the true jewel of consciousness. It is in the love affair that the mind has with truth that it surrenders unconditionally. And so ultimately, it is a love affair that facilitates enlightenment. A love affair between the mind and beingness, the mind and truth, the mind and the nothingness, the mind and the everythingness. This love affair is the only thing that really takes us home. And so the way of the heart, I see clearly as the Buddhist path, to find love and to operate from that place, taking care of everyone and everything. So quite often I hear it said that Buddhism is the religion of loving kindness. Well, it is if you find heart, but then anything is if you find heart. The trick is undoing yourself, undoing your defense systems, taking them away, being open enough to facilitate heart. That's the trick. And that takes a fair bit of effort. You can't get there by studying books or by listening to teachers. You get there through practice. And it is only in practice that we succeed. There is no other way to succeed. I collected knowledge for years and years and years. I was an absolute bookworm. And I collected tapes and I collected videos and I watched them thinking that somehow it was going to raise my consciousness levels, because I was getting a bit of a hit off the videos and that, because they were talks from enlightened teachers, Osho Rajneesh mostly. No, it didn't work. What it did is it fired up my thirst for truth, and in firing up my thirst, put me in a position where I realized that the only thing that was going to make a difference was practice. The practice of being present to reality. The practice of self-inquiry. The practice of openness. And so it's completely up to you what you do, but don't be led astray in thinking that somehow collecting knowledge and listening to gurus is going to wake you up. It is only your own effort, could call that right effort, that is actually going to make it work. And anything that human beings put their totality into, they tend to get good at. Whether it's music or poetry or art or business or higher consciousness or sport or anything. If we put our totality into anything, we get good at it. And so the same goes for higher consciousness. If you really want it, give it your totality. Make it so. Don't wait for someone else to make it so, because nobody is going to make it so for you but you. You're in charge of you. You create your reality by the way you think and how you act in the world. Your openness, and only your openness, will facilitate your experiencing heart. Up to you. Always up to you.
The last question. In Buddhism, samadhi is spoken about. Is that a state of being in love?
To me, samadhi, the word samadhi means awareness knowing itself in some way. Awareness being aware of itself, or beingness being aware of itself. And so awareness is usually just aware of the mind and through the senses, the world. When samadhi occurs, it's when the awareness to some degree is aware of itself. And that can simply be silence and stillness. Or it could be knowing self as the universe, knowing self as love. There's different levels. Not that any of them are important anyway. All that needs to happen is for awareness to become aware of itself. The different levels that people experience, the measuring, well, that's just the mind playing its game again. Awareness aware of itself is all that's required. For most human beings, that's a glimpse. It only happens for a few seconds, a few minutes, a few hours, or whatever. For someone who's awake, it is happening every moment, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That is what enlightenment is. Awareness is aware of itself. Awareness is aware of beingness as self. Awareness is aware of God, or God is aware of God. That is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. You could say that someone who's awake is in samadhi. Some people talk about deep samadhi. It's just awareness aware of itself. How the mind perceives it is irrelevant in a lot of ways, because it is beyond the mind. And the whole game of freedom is about going beyond the mind. Living as beingness, living as presence. And that's what these satsang meetings are about, to inspire people to go for it, to go for truth, to go for knowing yourself as truth, for going for freedom. It's up to you. Only you can make it so. Nobody else can. Thank you for satsang. Good to see you brave hearts here today.